The silence was deafening as Olivia Faulkner stood on the auction block, her slender fingers gripping the tattered shawl around her shoulders as if it were the last fragment of dignity she possessed. Medicine Bow, Wyoming, 1876. A place that had once been her home now felt like a cruel prison where memories haunted every corner and familiar faces had transformed into vultures waiting to pick at the remains of her shattered life. The summer sun beat down mercilessly, casting harsh shadows across the town square. Sweat beaded on Olivia's brow, but she refused to wipe it away. At 26, she never imagined she'd end up here a widow with nothing but the clothes on her back and a mountain of her late husband's gambling debts. $5, shouted a voice from the crowd. $5 for the widow Faulkner. Sheriff Wilson, a man whose sympathy had long since dried up like the creek beds in August, glanced at Olivia with something akin to pity before turning to address the gathering. $5 bid for Mrs. Faulkner's domestic services for 1 year to pay off her husband's debts. Do I hear 10? $10, came another voice, belonging to Harold Winters, the saloon owner whose establishment had been George Faulkner's second home. His eyes traveled over Olivia with undisguised interest that made her stomach turn. 15, called another. Olivia closed her eyes briefly, the humiliation burning hotter than the midday sun. 1 month ago, she had been the respectable wife of a cattle broker. Now, after George's death in what folks called a riding accident, though whispers of suicide followed the news of his massive debts, she was being auctioned off like livestock. $20. This from Emmett Grayson, the banker who'd foreclosed on their home. His thin lips curved into what might have been intended as a smile, but looked more like a predator baring its teeth. The bidding continued, each call making Olivia flinch as if struck. These men didn't want a housekeeper. They wanted to own a piece of her, to have power over a woman who'd once held her head high among them. $100. The crowd fell silent, heads turning to find the source of the bold bid. Olivia's eyes snapped open, searching the sea of faces until they landed on a tall figure at the back of the crowd. He stepped forward, and the people parted before him like water. Dust clung to his leather chaps, and his dark blue shirt bore the marks of hard travel. The wide brim of his hat cast shadows across his face, but Olivia could see the intensity in his gaze as he approached the auction block. $100. He repeated, voice clear and steady, and that's final. Sheriff Wilson's eyebrows shot up. Well now, that's generous for a year's service, Mr. Vance, Mason Vance. He removed his hat, revealing sun-streaked brown hair and eyes the color of whiskey, and it's not for a year. Sir, the sheriff looked confused. Mason Vance's boots thudded against the wooden platform as he climbed up to stand beside Olivia. He was taller than she'd first thought, his shoulders broad beneath his trail-worn shirt. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes that spoke of years squinting against the sun and wind. I'm buying her debt outright, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. $100 to clear what she owes, and then he turned to face Olivia directly, his gaze softening slightly. You'll never be sold again, madam. Not while I draw breath. Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. Olivia stared at the stranger, her heart hammering in her chest. Was this some cruel joke? Or perhaps something worse, a man who wanted to claim his purchase in private? Sheriff Wilson cleared his throat. Mr. Vance, I appreciate your chivalry, but Mrs. Faulkner's debts amount to nearly $300. The auction is for a year's domestic service to help repay $300 then, Mason interrupted, reaching into his vest pocket and pulling out a leather pouch. I'll pay it all, right here, right now. Olivia found her voice at last, though it emerged as little more than a whisper. Why would you do this? You don't even know me." His eyes met hers, and for a moment the crowd, the town, the whole of Wyoming seemed to disappear. "No, madam, I don't. But I know what's right, and this," he gestured to the auction block, "this ain't it." Sheriff Wilson counted the money twice before declaring the debt settled. Mason extended his hand to Olivia, who hesitated before placing her trembling fingers in his calloused palm. "Where will you go now, Mrs. Faulkner?" the sheriff asked as she stepped down from the platform. Before she could answer, Mason spoke again. "I've got a ranch about half a day's ride from town. Mrs. Faulkner is welcome to stay there in the guest cabin until she decides what she wants to do next." The shock must have shown on her face because he added quietly, for her ears alone, "No strings, madam. Just a roof and some peace." Olivia had few options. Her friends had vanished when George's debts came to light, and the boarding house wouldn't take her without payment up front. This stranger's offer, however unlikely, seemed her only path forward. "I accept your hospitality, Mr. Vance," she said formally, though her heart raced with uncertainty. "But I insist on working for my keep." A small smile crossed his weathered face. "We can discuss that on the ride. My wagon's this way." As they walked through the dispersing crowd, Olivia felt the weight of stares, some curious, some disappointed, some outright hostile. Emmett Grayson in particular watched them go with narrowed eyes, his thin fingers tapping against his walking stick. Mason's wagon was simple but well kept, with a team of 2 strong bay horses. He helped her up onto the wooden seat before climbing up beside her. "I have nothing," Olivia said suddenly as he took up the reins. "Not a change of clothes, not a hairbrush. Everything was sold to cover the debts." Mason nodded thoughtfully. "We'll stop at the general store before we head out, get you what you need." "With what money?" she asked bitterly. "You've already spent more than enough on a stranger, Mrs. Faulkner," he said, clicking his tongue to set the horses in motion. "Some things are worth more than money. A person's dignity is one of them." The wagon rolled down Medicine Bow's Main Street, and Olivia looked back at the town that had been her home for 6 years. She had arrived as a bride, full of hope and dreams. She was leaving as a widow with nothing but the kindness of a stranger to sustain her. "Call me Olivia," she said quietly, "if we're to be neighbors of sorts." "Olivia," he repeated, and something in the way he said her name made her glance at his profile. "I'm Mason, and I think you'll find the Lazy V a far sight better than what you're leaving behind." As the town receded behind them, Olivia felt a strange mixture of fear and hope stirring in her chest. She didn't know this man, couldn't fathom his motives, yet something in his steady presence calmed the panic that had been her constant companion since George's death. "Why did you do it?" she asked as they pulled up outside the general store. "Why spend so much money on someone you don't know?" Mason set the brake and turned to her, his expression serious. 3 years ago, I saw a man sold at auction down in Texas. Debt peonage, they called it. He worked himself to death within a year." He paused, his jaw tightening. "I swore I'd never stand by and watch another human being sold if I could stop it." He climbed down from the wagon and came around to help her down. As her feet touched the ground, he added, "Besides, I've been on my own a long while. Might be nice to have a neighbor at the Lazy V, even if it's just temporary." Inside the general store, Mason insisted she select everything she needed: 2 dresses, undergarments, a nightgown, toiletries, and even a warm coat for the coming fall. When the storekeeper's wife, Mrs. Palmer, offered to help Olivia change into one of her new dresses in the back room, she gratefully accepted. "That Mason Vance," Mrs. Palmer said as she helped button up the simple blue calico, "he's a good man. Keeps to himself mostly, but fair in his dealings. You know him well." Olivia couldn't help asking, Well enough to know he's never shown much interest in town affairs before today. The older woman's eyes twinkled. Must be something special about you, dear. Olivia flushed. It's not like that. He was just being kind. Mrs. Palmer smiled knowingly but said nothing more. When they emerged, Mason was settling the bill. He turned at their approach, and something flickered in his eyes as he took in Olivia's transformed appearance, clean, properly dressed, with her honey-brown hair neatly pinned up again. "Better?" he asked simply. "Much, thank you." They loaded her few new possessions into the wagon and set off again, this time heading west out of town. The road followed the curve of the Medicine Bow River for several miles before veering north into rolling grasslands. In the distance, the mountains rose blue and hazy against the sky. "Your husband," Mason said after they'd been traveling in comfortable silence for a while. "What did he do?" Olivia stiffened. "George was a cattle broker, or at least that's what he claimed to be doing when he traveled." Her hands twisted in her lap. "After he died, I discovered he'd been gambling away every penny we had and borrowing more besides." Mason nodded but didn't press further. Instead, he pointed ahead. "That's Lazy V land starting at that ridge. Another hour and we'll be home. Home." The word sounded strange to Olivia's ears. Her home was gone, sold to the highest bidder like everything else she'd owned. "I meant what I said about working," she said firmly. "I won't be a charity case." "Fair enough." Mason adjusted his hat against the late afternoon sun. "Ranch could use a woman's touch, truth be told. My housekeeper left last month to marry her sweetheart in Laramie." "I can cook and clean," Olivia offered. "Mend clothes, tend a garden. I'm not afraid of hard work." He glanced at her, one corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "Never thought you would be." As the wagon crested a hill, the Lazy V spread out before them, a prosperous-looking ranch nestled in a verdant valley. A sturdy two-story house of weathered logs stood at the center, surrounded by a barn, corrals, and several smaller outbuildings. A creek wound through the property, its banks lined with cottonwoods that rustled in the gentle breeze. "It's beautiful," Olivia breathed, surprised by the size and condition of the place. This was no struggling homestead, but a well-established ranch. "Been here 10 years, Mason said, pride evident in his voice. "Started with nothing but that cabin there." He pointed to a small structure near the creek and 20 head of cattle. "Now I've got over 500 head and 1,600 acres, all by yourself. Got 3 hands who help with the cattle. They bunk in the bunkhouse behind the barn." He guided the wagon toward the main house, but the house has been empty since Mrs. Tillman left. As they approached, a dog came bounding out to greet them, a black and white border collie who circled the wagon with excited barks. "That's Cap," Mason said, a genuine smile warming his features. "Best cattle dog in the territory." They pulled up in front of the house, and Mason helped Olivia down. Up close, she could see the craftsmanship that had gone into building the place, the precisely fitted logs, the wide covered porch, the glass windows that must have been brought in at considerable expense. "I thought you said I'd be staying in the cabin," she said, confused. "Changed my mind," Mason replied, lifting her small bundle of new possessions from the wagon. "Cabin needs work before winter. You'll take Mrs. Tillman's old room for now. It's proper and comfortable." Olivia wanted to protest, but found herself too weary to argue. The emotional toll of the day had left her drained, and the prospect of a real bed was too tempting to refuse. The interior of the house was surprisingly neat for a bachelor's dwelling, though it lacked the feminine touches that would make it truly homey. The furniture was solid and well made, with a large stone fireplace dominating the main room. A staircase led to the upper floor, and Mason gestured for her to follow him up. "This will be your room," he said, opening a door at the top of the stairs. Mine's at the other end of the hall. Kitchen's downstairs, along with the pantry and my study. The bedroom was simply furnished but clean, with a brass bed, a chest of drawers, and a small writing desk beneath the window. Fresh linens were on the bed, and a basin and pitcher sat atop the washstand. "Thank you," Olivia said, suddenly overwhelmed by the strangeness of her situation. This morning she had awakened in the sheriff's spare room, awaiting auction. Now she was standing in a comfortable bedroom in the home of a man she'd known for mere hours. Mason seemed to sense her unease. "I'll leave you to settle in. Supper in an hour. Nothing fancy, just beans and ham hock." "I'm not much of a cook." After he left, closing the door behind him, Olivia sank onto the edge of the bed. Tears she'd held back all day finally spilled over, but whether they were from relief, fear, or some combination of both, she couldn't say. One thing was certain: Mason Vance had saved her from a terrible fate. Now she just had to figure out what this new life might hold, and whether she could truly trust the quiet rancher who had bought her freedom at such a price. Downstairs, Mason stood in his kitchen, staring at the coffee pot as if it might offer some wisdom. What had he been thinking? He'd ridden into town for supplies, not to bring home a widow with haunted eyes and enough pride to match his own. Yet when he'd seen her standing on that auction block, something had broken loose inside him, a fury at the injustice. Yes, but something else too. Something he wasn't ready to examine too closely. He set out 2 plates on the worn oak table and hoped he hadn't made the biggest mistake of his life. Over the next few days, Olivia and Mason established a careful routine. She rose early to prepare breakfast before he headed out to work with the cattle. During the day, she cleaned the house that had clearly been neglected in the housekeeper's absence, airing out rooms and scrubbing floors until they shone. The ranch hands Tom, a grizzled cowboy in his 50s, Louis, a skilled Mexican vaquero, and Caleb, a young man barely 20, kept their distance at first, eating the meals she prepared with mumbled thanks before hurrying back to their duties. "They're not used to having a lady around," Mason explained over supper one evening, nearly a week after her arrival. "Give them time." Olivia nodded, cutting into the venison roast she'd prepared. "And you? Are you used to having a lady around, Mr. Vance?" Mason's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Can't say that I am." His eyes met hers briefly before returning to his plate. "And I thought we agreed you'd call me Mason." "Mason," she corrected herself, feeling an unexpected flush warm her cheeks. That night, Olivia stood by her bedroom window, gazing out at the moonlit landscape. In the distance, she could see the silhouette of Mason checking the corrals one last time before turning in. He moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin, in his own place in the world. What would that feel like? She wondered. To belong somewhere again. The following morning, Olivia was kneading bread dough when a rider approached the house. Through the kitchen window, she watched as Mason walked out to meet him. The conversation appeared tense, with the visitor gesturing emphatically while Mason stood with arms crossed, his stance unyielding. When the rider finally departed, Mason came inside, his expression stormy. "Is everything all right?" Olivia asked, wiping flour from her hands. "That was Emmett Grayson's man," Mason said, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "Seems the banker feels I interfered with a legitimate business transaction." Olivia's stomach clenched. "The auction?" Mason nodded, taking a long drink. "He's offering to refund my money and take the debt off my hands, and me with it," Olivia said softly. "That's not going to happen." Mason set his cup down with enough force to slosh coffee onto the table. "Your debt's paid. You're a free woman." Then why would he think? Because men like Grayson believe everything and everyone has a price. Mason's jaw tightened. And because he had plans for you that I spoiled. The implications made Olivia shudder. She'd seen the way Grayson looked at her in town, the proprietary gleam in his eyes. If Mason hadn't stepped forward. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not just for today, but for that day in town. I don't think I ever properly thanked you." Mason's expression softened. "You don't need to thank me for doing what any decent man would do." "But that's just it," Olivia replied, returning to her bread dough with renewed vigor. "There weren't any other decent men stepping forward that day, only you." The afternoon brought another surprise when Caleb, the youngest ranch hand, appeared at the kitchen door, hat in hand. "Mrs. Faulkner, I was wondering if maybe you could help me with something." Curious, Olivia followed him to the bunkhouse, where he sheepishly showed her a shirt torn nearly in half. "It's my Sunday best," he explained, cheeks reddening. "Caught it on a nail and I don't know how to mend it proper like." Olivia smiled, taking the garment. "I'd be happy to fix this for you, and perhaps I could teach you a few basic stitches for next time." Caleb's grateful smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. After that, the ice was broken. Tom brought her boots that needed resoling, and Louis asked if she might help him write a letter to his mother in Mexico. Before long, the ranch hands were comfortable enough to join her and Mason for the occasional meal, bringing a warmth to the house that had been missing before. One evening in late September, nearly a month after her arrival at the Lazy V, Olivia was hanging laundry on the line when Mason approached, leading his horse. "Thought you might like to see more of the ranch," he offered, his usual reserve seeming to have softened somewhat. "If you're not too busy." Olivia glanced at the half-empty basket. "The sheets can wait." Mason helped her mount his gentle mare, then swung up behind her. The unexpected proximity sent a flutter through her stomach as his arms reached around her to take the reins. "Ready?" he asked. His voice close to her ear, she nodded, not trusting herself to speak. They rode west, following the creek as it wound through meadows dotted with late wildflowers. Mason pointed out landmarks: a lightning-struck tree where he'd once sheltered from a storm, a hilltop where he'd fought off wolves in his first winter, a natural spring that never ran dry, even in drought years. "I never asked how you came to be in Wyoming," Olivia said as they paused to let the horse drink from the creek. Mason was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. "I was born in Pennsylvania," he finally said. "My father owned a small factory. Had my life all mapped out: school, then join the family business, marry the daughter of another factory owner. What happened? The war." His voice grew distant. "When I came back, everything looked different. Couldn't stomach the city anymore or my father's plans. Headed west with nothing but what I could carry and never looked back." Olivia thought about how different their paths had been. He had chosen to leave his old life behind, while hers had been ripped away without warning. "You ever regret it?" she asked. "Leaving everything familiar?" Mason considered this. "Not the decision, but sometimes I regret being alone all these years." His arms tightened slightly around her as he guided the horse up a gentle slope. "What about you? How did you end up in Medicine Bow?" "I grew up in St. Louis," Olivia replied. "My father was a teacher. After my parents died of influenza, I became a companion to a wealthy widow. That's where I met George. He was courting her niece." She smiled sadly at the memory. "He was so charming, so full of grand plans. When he proposed, it seemed like an adventure. We came west because he said there were opportunities in the cattle business." "And there are," Mason confirmed, "for men willing to work hard and deal honestly." "George preferred quicker returns," Olivia said, the bitterness she thought she'd set aside rising again. "I was blind to it for too long." They reached the top of the hill and Mason reined in the horse, Before them stretched a vista of rolling grasslands, the distant mountains framing the scene like a painting. "This is my favorite spot on the whole ranch," Mason said. "Whenever I need to think clearly, I come here." Olivia understood why. The beauty was breathtaking, the sense of possibility endless. "It's wonderful." As they sat in companionable silence, watching the play of light and shadow across the landscape, Olivia realized something had shifted between them. The careful distance Mason had maintained since her arrival had diminished, replaced by something warmer, something that made her pulse quicken when their eyes met. It was too soon, she told herself firmly. Her husband had been dead less than 3 months. She was still putting the pieces of her life back together. And Mason, what did she really know about this quiet, self-contained man who had rescued her on what seemed like a whim? Yet as they rode back to the ranch house, the solid warmth of him behind her, Olivia couldn't deny the comfort she found in his presence, or the way her heart seemed to recognize something in him that her mind was still struggling to understand. That night, she dreamed of standing on a hilltop, the wind in her hair and the vast Wyoming sky above her. In the dream, she wasn't alone. The first snowfall came early that year, dusting the lazy V with white in mid-October. Olivia woke to a transformed world, the familiar landscape rendered magical in its winter garb. She had been at the ranch for nearly 2 months now, and the temporary arrangement had begun to feel permanent. She'd created a small garden plot near the house, put up preserves for winter, and even rearranged some of the furniture to make the large house feel more like a home. Mason never mentioned her leaving, and Olivia never brought it up. There was too much work to do, too much satisfaction in seeing the ranch thrive under her care alongside his. The hands had fully accepted her presence, even bringing small gifts from town ribbons, a packet of tea, a book of poetry as tokens of their appreciation. And Mason was changing too. The reserve that had characterized him when they first met had gradually melted away, revealing a man of quiet humor, thoughtful intelligence, and unwavering integrity. He sought her opinion on ranch matters, brought her wildflowers when he rode the far pastures, and spent evenings by the fire discussing books they'd both read or telling her stories of his early days in Wyoming. Olivia knew she was falling in love with him, and the realization terrified her. She'd been so wrong about George, so easily deceived by charm and promises. How could she trust her judgment now? Yet Mason was nothing like George. Where her late husband had been all flash and no substance, Mason was solid to his core. His words matched his actions. His promises were few but always kept. On a crisp November morning, Olivia was chopping vegetables for stew when Mason burst through the door, his expression more animated than she'd ever seen it. "Get your coat," he said, grinning. "You need to see this." Curious, Olivia followed him outside and around to the barn. Inside, in a freshly prepared stall lined with clean straw, stood a beautiful chestnut mare with a white blaze down her face. "This is Penny," Mason said, patting the horse's neck. "She's yours." Olivia stared at him in disbelief. "Mine." "But I can't." "You can and you should," Mason insisted. "You've been using my old mare, but she's getting on in years. Penny here is gentle but spirited, perfect for you." Overwhelmed, Olivia approached the mare, who nickered softly and nudged her hand. "She's beautiful, but why?" Mason shrugged, suddenly looking almost shy. "Winter's coming. You should be able to get around on your own, not depend on me or the hands for a ride into town." The gift represented more than transportation, and they both knew it. It was freedom. Independence, the very things Mason had promised her that first day on the auction block. "Thank you," Olivia said, blinking back tears as she stroked Penny's velvety nose. "This means more than I can say." That afternoon, Mason taught her how to saddle Penny properly and rode alongside her as she got accustomed to her new mount. The mare was indeed perfect, responsive but patient, with a smooth gait that made riding a pleasure. As they returned to the barn, cheeks flushed from the cold air and exercise, Mason helped Olivia dismount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. She looked up to thank him and found his face closer than she expected, his eyes warm with an emotion she'd seen growing there over the past weeks. "Olivia," he began, then hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain, her heart hammered in her chest. "Yes. I know you came here out of necessity, not choice," he said carefully. "And I've tried to give you space, time to heal from everything that happened in town." She nodded, not trusting her voice. "But I need to know," Mason continued, "are you staying here at the Lazy V?" The question behind the question hung in the air between them. Olivia took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I'd like to stay," she said softly. "If I'm welcome." "You're more than welcome." Mason's hands tightened slightly at her waist. "These past months with you here, the ranch has never felt more like home." It was perhaps the most revealing thing he'd ever said to her, this man of few words. Olivia's heart swelled with sudden certainty. "I feel the same," she admitted. "I never expected to find a home again after George died, especially not like this." Mason's expression grew serious. "I'm not asking you to replace what you lost, Olivia. I'm asking if there might be room in your life for something new, something different." She thought of the journey that had brought her here, the grief, the humiliation, the despair, and then the slow rebuilding of her life and sense of self at the Lazy V. Mason had been there through all of it, a steady presence offering support without demands, friendship without conditions. "There is," she said finally, meeting his gaze directly. "There has been for some time now." Relief and joy transformed his features. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Mason lowered his head until his lips met hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. Olivia responded with all the feelings she'd been carefully containing for weeks. Her arms slid around his neck as she leaned into him, deepening the kiss until they both drew back, breathless. "Well," Mason said, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, "I guess that answers my next question." Olivia laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. "Which was, whether I could court you properly, Mrs. Faulkner." "I think we're a bit past the formal courting stage, Mr. Vance," she teased, then grew serious. "But yes, yes to that and to whatever comes after." The winter of 1876-77 was one of the coldest on record in Wyoming territory. But inside the main house of the Lazy V, warmth and happiness flourished. Mason and Olivia's courtship progressed with the same quiet certainty that characterized everything about their relationship. They rode together when weather permitted, shared meals with the hands, and spent long evenings by the fire, gradually learning each other's histories, dreams, and hearts. Mason spoke of his time in the war, the nightmares that still occasionally plagued him, and his journey west in search of peace. Olivia revealed the full extent of George's betrayals, her fears of trusting again, and her grief at never having the children she'd always wanted. "It's not too late for that," Mason told her one snowy evening as they sat side by side on the sofa, her head resting on his shoulder. "For children, I mean, if that's still something you want." Olivia looked up at him, searching his face. "Is it something you want?" Mason's hand found hers, fingers intertwining. "With you? Yes, I never thought much about family before you came here. The ranch was enough. Now I can see how much more there could be." Christmas brought another surprise when Mason presented Olivia with a small box after dinner. Inside was a delicate gold ring set with a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. "It was my mother's," he explained as Olivia stared at it in wonder. I sent for it back in November. It's beautiful, she whispered. Olivia Faulkner, Mason said, taking her hand. I know it hasn't been very long, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Will you marry me? Make this ranch truly your home and me the happiest man in Wyoming. Tears filled Olivia's eyes as she nodded. Yes, she managed. Yes, I will. Mason slid the ring onto her finger, then kissed her with a passion that left no doubt of his feelings. They were married on New Year's Day, 1877, in the main room of the ranch house. The circuit preacher performed the ceremony, with Tom, Lewis, and Caleb as witnesses. Olivia wore a new blue dress ordered from Laramie, and Mason surprised her by appearing in a proper suit rather than his usual ranch clothes. You clean up nicely, Mr. Vance, she whispered as they shared their first dance as husband and wife, the hands providing music with a fiddle and harmonica. Only for you, Mrs. Vance, he replied, the new name making her heart skip. Later, when they were finally alone in the master bedroom, now their bedroom Mason took her face in his hands and looked at her with such tenderness it made her breath catch. I want you to know, he said solemnly, that day in town, when I saw you on that auction block. I wasn't planning to get married, wasn't planning to fall in love. I just knew I couldn't stand by and watch what was happening. Olivia placed her hand over his. And now I thank God every day that I rode into Medicine Bow when I did, Mason said, drawing her close. Because finding you is the best thing that ever happened to me. Their first night together as husband and wife was everything Olivia had hoped for and more. Where George had been selfish and sometimes rough, Mason was considerate and gentle, placing her pleasure above his own. He treated her body as something precious to be cherished, not possessed, and when they finally lay tangled together in the aftermath, Olivia felt truly complete for the first time in her life. I love you, she whispered into the darkness. Mason's arms tightened around her. And I love you, Olivia Vance, more than I have words to say. Spring came to the Lazy V with a riot of wildflowers and new beginnings. The cattle thrived. The garden Olivia had planted produced its first tender shoots, and the business of the ranch continued with renewed vigor under the guidance of its now married owner. In April, Olivia received news that surprised them both. She was expecting a child. Mason's joy was boundless, his protective instincts immediately kicking in as he insisted she rest more and let him hire additional help for the house. I'm pregnant, not ill, Olivia protested, laughing as he tried to take a basket of laundry from her hands. Humor me, Mason replied, stealing a kiss as he successfully captured the basket. I've waited a long time to be a father. As her body changed with the growing child, Olivia found herself reflecting on the strange twists of fate that had brought her to this happiness. Had anyone told her a year ago that the humiliation of being auctioned in the town square would lead to the greatest joy she'd ever known, she would have thought them mad. Yet here she was, married to a good man who adored her, mistress of a prosperous ranch, and expecting a child who would be welcomed into a home filled with love. The contrast to her life with George couldn't have been starker. One warm day in June, as Olivia sat on the porch mending one of Mason's shirts, she spotted a rider approaching. It wasn't one of their hands, and something about the way he sat his horse sent a chill through her despite the summer heat. Mason was checking the north pasture with Tom and Caleb. Only Lewis was nearby, working in the barn. Olivia set aside her sewing and stood, one hand instinctively going to her slightly rounded belly. As the rider drew closer, she recognized him with a jolt of alarm. Emmett Grayson, the banker from Medicine Bow. She hadn't seen him since the day of the auction, and his appearance now, unannounced, could not possibly mean anything good. Lewis must have noticed her reaction, because he emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a cloth as he moved to stand near the porch. "Mrs. Vance," he called. "Everything all right?" "I'm not sure," she replied, grateful for his presence. "Would you stay close while I see what Mr. Grayson wants?" Lewis nodded, his hand casually resting near the knife at his belt as Grayson reined in his horse before the porch. "Mrs. Faulkner," the banker said, not bothering to dismount. "Or is it Mrs. Vance now? I heard rumors." "It's Mrs. Vance," Olivia confirmed, lifting her chin. "Can I help you with something, Mr. Grayson?" The banker's thin lips curved in what might have been intended as a smile. "I was passing by and thought I'd check on your situation. Make sure Vance is treating you well." "My husband treats me very well," Olivia said coldly. "Not that it's any of your concern." Grayson's gaze traveled over her, lingering on her midsection in a way that made her skin crawl. "I see congratulations are in order. How fortunate for you both." "Was there something specific you wanted, Mr. Grayson?" Olivia asked, wishing Mason would return. "My husband should be back soon if you have business with him." "Just passing through," Grayson repeated, though his expression suggested otherwise. "Interesting development, though. The railroad's looking to expand through this area. Land values are going to skyrocket." He paused significantly. "Some folks might be looking to sell before that news becomes common knowledge." Olivia understood immediately. Grayson was fishing for information about the Lazy V, perhaps hoping to acquire it before the railroad announcement drove up prices. "My husband handles all business matters concerning the ranch," she said firmly. "You'll need to speak with him directly." Grayson's face hardened. "Still putting on airs, I see. Don't forget where you came from, Mrs. Vance. Not so long ago, you were standing on an auction block with nothing but the clothes on your back." Before Olivia could respond, Lewis stepped forward, his usually gentle demeanor replaced by something harder. "I think you should leave now, senor," he said quietly. "The boss won't take kindly to you speaking to his wife that way." Grayson glared at Lewis, but seemed to think better of pressing the issue. With a curt nod to Olivia, he wheeled his horse around and rode away, dust billowing in his wake. Olivia's hands were shaking as she thanked Lewis for his intervention. "De nada, Mrs. Vance," the vaquero replied. "Men like that, they only understand strength." When Mason returned and heard about Grayson's visit, his reaction was exactly as Olivia had expected: cold anger followed by increased vigilance. He sent one of the hands into town to inquire about the railroad rumors and doubled the patrols around the ranch's boundaries. "Do you think he'll be trouble?" Olivia asked that night as they prepared for bed. Mason sighed, sitting on the edge of the mattress to remove his boots. "Grayson's always been trouble. He's got half the businesses in Medicine Bow in his pocket through loans and mortgages. But coming here, talking to you like that when I wasn't around, that's crossing a line." Olivia moved behind him, placing her hands on his tense shoulders and kneading gently. "He wanted to rattle me, make me feel small again." "Did it work?" Mason asked, tilting his head back to look up at her. She smiled, bending to kiss him lightly. "Not even a little. I'm not that frightened widow anymore." Mason pulled her around and onto his lap, mindful of her condition. "No, you certainly are not, Mrs. Vance." His kiss drove all thoughts of Emmett Grayson from her mind, and later, as they lay together in the darkness, the baby kicked for the first time a flutter of movement that had them both placing hands on Olivia's belly in wonder. "Hello there, little one," Mason whispered. "We can't wait to meet you." The next morning brought unexpected visitors: Tom's wife and daughters, arriving from their homestead 10 miles away with baskets of food and bundles of fabric. "Heard you might need some help getting ready for the baby," Sarah explained as her girls ages 10 and 12 explored the house with obvious delight. Thought we'd come stay a spell, if that's all right. Olivia, who had been wondering how she would manage all the preparations for the baby on her own, welcomed them with open arms. Sarah was a skilled midwife as well as an excellent seamstress, and her daughters were well-behaved and eager to help around the house. "Tom's been singing your praises for months," Sarah confided as they worked together on baby clothes. "Says the ranch has never run so smoothly or felt so much like home since you arrived." Olivia flushed with pleasure at the compliment. "Mason and the hands have been wonderful." "I've never felt so valued." Sarah nodded knowingly. "That's a good man you married. Tom says he was like a different person after you came, smiling more, even whistling sometimes." The summer progressed with a steady rhythm of work and preparation. Mason expanded the master bedroom to accommodate a nursery area, building a cradle from cherry wood with his own hands. The hands constructed a proper chicken coop closer to the house, so Olivia wouldn't have to walk as far to gather eggs as her pregnancy advanced. In late July, Caleb rode in from town with news that confirmed Grayson's hints about the railroad surveyors had been spotted marking a route that would pass within 5 miles of the Lazy V. "This changes everything," Mason said at dinner that night. "We'll need to increase the herd, maybe add sheep as well. With the railroad so close, we can ship directly to eastern markets." Olivia listened as he outlined his plans, marveling at his foresight and business acumen. This was the side of Mason few people saw, the shrewd rancher who had built the Lazy V from nothing through hard work and smart decisions. "What do you think?" he asked, including her in the discussion as he always did now. "Too ambitious." "Not at all," Olivia replied, her belief in him absolute. "The Lazy V should grow with the territory. Our children will need something substantial to inherit someday." Mason's eyes softened at her words. "Children, plural. You have plans I should know about, Mrs. Vance." Olivia laughed, resting a hand on her now prominent belly. "Let's get through this one first, shall we?" August brought scorching heat and news that Emmett Grayson had been buying up land along the proposed railroad route, sometimes using questionable tactics to pressure owners into selling. Several smaller ranchers had already succumbed to his offers or threats. "He'll come for the Lazy V eventually," Mason predicted grimly. "We won't sell," Olivia stated, her tone leaving no room for argument. "This is our home, our future. No amount of money could replace what we've built here." Mason kissed her forehead. "Have I told you lately how much I love you?" Their resolve was tested sooner than expected. In early September, just weeks before Olivia's due date, Grayson himself arrived at the ranch, accompanied by 2 hard-faced men who remained mounted while the banker approached the house. Mason met him on the porch, his stance casual but alert. Olivia watched from the window, Sarah at her side. "Vance," Grayson began without preamble, "I've got buyers interested in this land. Railroads coming through, as you've no doubt heard. I'm prepared to make you a generous offer." "Not interested," Mason replied evenly. "The Lazy V isn't for sale." Grayson's face tightened. "Everyone has a price, Vance. Name yours." "You're not hearing me, Grayson. This ranch is not for sale, not to you, not to anyone, not at any price." The banker's expression darkened. "That's foolish pride talking. Think of your wife, your coming child." "The money I'm offering would set you up for life." "My wife and child are exactly why I'm saying no," Mason countered. "This ranch is their future, their security." "Security can be a fragile thing," Grayson said softly, the threat barely veiled. "Accidents happen, fires start, cattle sicken. A man should consider all possibilities before making such a final decision." Mason took a step forward, and Olivia saw the change in his demeanor, the dangerous stillness that came over him when truly angered. Are you threatening me, Grayson? His voice was quiet but carried clearly through the open window, because that would be a serious mistake. The two men flanking Grayson shifted in their saddles, hands drifting toward their weapons. Olivia's heart raced. Where were the hands? Tom and Caleb had ridden out at dawn to check the western boundary, but Lewis should be nearby. As if summoned by her thoughts, the vaquero appeared from the side of the house, rifle held casually but unmistakably ready. From the barn emerged Caleb's younger brother Danny, who had joined the ranch crew for the summer. Similarly armed, Grayson assessed the situation and apparently decided against pushing further for now. Think about my offer, Vance. I'll be in Medicine Bow for another week. After that, the price goes down, not up. With a curt nod, he rejoined his men, and the three riders departed at a measured pace. Mason watched until they were out of sight before coming inside. His face was grim as he found Olivia in the sitting room. "You heard." She nodded, hands protectively cradling her belly. "Do you think he'll really try something?" Mason ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of agitation. "I don't know. Grayson's always operated in the gray areas of the law, but outright violence, that would be new even for him." "What should we do?" "Be prepared," Mason said firmly. "I'll send word to the sheriff in Medicine Bow about Grayson's implied threats. Meanwhile, no one rides alone, and you," he took her hands in his, "you don't leave the house without one of us nearby, not until this is settled." Olivia wanted to protest the restriction but understood the necessity. With the baby due so soon, she couldn't risk anything happening to either of them. "I'll be careful," she promised, "but you be careful too. I can't do this without you, Mason." He gathered her close, his hand covering hers over their unborn child. "You won't have to." The next few days passed in tense vigilance. Mason organized the hands into round-the-clock patrols, with Tom's older son joining them temporarily to help cover all approaches to the ranch house. Lewis and his cousin, who lived in a neighboring county, rigged an elaborate system of trip wires and bells that would alert them to nighttime intruders. Through it all, Olivia continued preparing for the baby's arrival, refusing to let fear overshadow the joy of impending motherhood. She worked on the layette, arranged and rearranged the nursery corner of their bedroom, and rested when Sarah or Mason insisted. 4 days after Grayson's visit, Olivia woke in the pre-dawn darkness to a sharp pain that took her breath away. She lay still, waiting, and when it came again 10 minutes later, she knew. "Mason," she said, touching his shoulder. "It's time." The next 12 hours were a blur of pain, determination, and finally, overwhelming joy as Sarah guided Olivia through labor, while Mason alternated between pacing outside and holding his wife's hand through the worst contractions. "One more push," Sarah encouraged as the sun began to set. "That's it, Olivia. Almost there." With a final, tremendous effort, Olivia brought their child into the world, a healthy, squalling boy with a thatch of dark hair and his father's strong features. "You have a son," Sarah announced, quickly cleaning and wrapping the infant before placing him in Olivia's arms. Mason, allowed back into the room at last, stood frozen in the doorway, his expression one of awe as he beheld his wife and child. "Come meet your son," Olivia said softly, her exhaustion forgotten in the wonder of the moment. Mason approached the bed with reverence, sitting carefully beside her and extending a tentative finger to touch the baby's tiny hand. When those miniature fingers curled around his, Mason's eyes filled with tears. "He's perfect," he whispered. "You're both perfect." They named him Samuel Thomas Vance, Samuel after Olivia's father, Thomas after Tom, who had become Mason's right-hand man and friend over the years. The night of Samuel's birth, as Olivia rested with the baby nestled against her, Mason kept vigil by the bedroom window, watchful despite the joy of the day. Grayson's deadline for accepting his offer had passed, and the banker's parting words weighed heavily on his mind. He needn't have worried about Grayson that night, but trouble came from an unexpected quarter 2 days later. Olivia was nursing Samuel when Lewis burst into the house, his usual composure shattered. "Fire!" he shouted. "The south pasture, it's burning!" Mason was on his feet instantly. "How bad?" "Wind's driving it toward the house," Lewis reported grimly. "Tom and the others are trying to contain it, but it's moving fast." Mason turned to Olivia, who was already rising. Samuel clutched to her chest. "You need to be ready to leave if we can't control it. Sarah will help you pack what you need." "Be careful," Olivia pleaded as he prepared to join the firefighting effort. He kissed her quickly, then Samuel's head. "Keep him safe." From the porch, Olivia could see the smoke rising in an ominous column to the south. Sarah joined her, already gathering essentials into a bag. "The wagon's ready if we need it," she said. "But those men know what they're doing. If anyone can stop a wildfire, it's them." Hours passed in anxious waiting. Olivia alternated between caring for Samuel and watching the progress of the fire from the porch. The men had managed to create a firebreak by burning a controlled line between the advancing flames and the ranch buildings, but the wind was making their task nearly impossible. Just when it seemed they might lose the battle, Providence intervened in the form of a sudden summer thunderstorm. The rain came down in sheets, dousing the flames and turning the firefighters' desperate efforts to jubilation. Mason returned to the house soaked and exhausted, but triumphant. His face and hands were smudged with soot, and his clothes reeked of smoke, but his smile as he beheld his wife and son safe and waiting was radiant. "The fire's out," he reported, accepting the glass of water Olivia handed him. "We lost about 50 acres of grazing land, but the buildings are safe and no cattle were harmed." "Thank God," Olivia breathed. "Do you think it was natural? Lightning, maybe." Mason's expression darkened. "Lewis found something you should see." He led her to the barn, where Tom stood guard over a blackened metal container. "Coal oil," Mason explained. "Found it at the origin point of the fire. This was deliberate, Olivia." "Grayson," she whispered, clutching Samuel closer. Mason nodded grimly. "Has to be. The timing's too convenient." "What will we do?" "First, I'm sending Tom to fetch the sheriff. We've got evidence now." Mason's jaw set in a determined line. "And then I'm going to Medicine Bow myself. This ends now." Olivia wanted to protest, to beg him not to confront Grayson directly, but she knew Mason well enough to recognize when his mind was made up. Besides, she agreed they couldn't live under constant threat, especially now with Samuel to protect. "When will you go?" she asked instead. "Tomorrow, first light," Mason decided. "The sheriff should be here by then to keep watch over the ranch." That night, as Samuel slept peacefully in his cradle beside their bed, Mason and Olivia held each other close, both acutely aware of how much they had to lose. "Promise me you'll be careful," Olivia murmured against his chest. "No heroics. Just talk to the sheriff, make the formal complaint, and come home." Mason kissed the top of her head. "I promise. Grayson's not worth dying for. You and Samuel, you're what matters." Morning came too quickly. Mason dressed quietly, trying not to wake Olivia and the baby, but she stirred as he buckled his gun belt. "You're taking your revolver," she observed, sitting up. "Just a precaution," Mason assured her. "I don't anticipate trouble in town, but after yesterday." Olivia nodded, understanding. "The sheriff arrived last night, just after midnight. He's taking statements from the hands this morning about the fire." Mason sat on the edge of the bed, reaching out to touch Samuel's downy head. "I should be back by nightfall." Olivia caught his hand, bringing it to her lips. "I love you, Mason Vance." His expression softened. "And I love you, Olivia Vance, more than life itself." With a final kiss for her and a gentle touch to his sleeping son's cheek, Mason left, the sound of his horses' hoofbeats fading into the dawn. The day crawled by with excruciating slowness for Olivia. She tried to focus on Samuel, on the normal routines of the household, but her thoughts constantly strayed to Mason and what might be happening in Medicine Bow. Sheriff Patterson, a grizzled veteran of frontier law enforcement, was reassuringly competent. He stationed one of his deputies at the ranch and took detailed accounts of the fire and the discovery of the coal oil container from every witness. "This is serious business, Mrs. Vance," he told Olivia as she served him coffee at midday. "Arson's a hanging offense in this territory, especially when lives are endangered." "You think you'll be able to prove Grayson was behind it?" Olivia asked. The sheriff's weathered face creased in thought. "Maybe, maybe not. Men like him usually hire others to do their dirty work. But attempted intimidation of a landowner, combined with the arson evidence, might be enough to make him think twice about coming after your property again." Olivia prayed he was right. All she wanted was for Mason to come home safely and for their family to be left in peace. As the afternoon wore on, she found herself checking the road more and more frequently, expecting to see Mason's familiar figure at any moment. But the hours passed, and still he did not return. By sunset, Olivia's anxiety had reached a fever pitch. Samuel, perhaps sensing his mother's distress, was fussy and difficult to settle. Sarah tried to reassure her. The sheriff probably had more questions than expected, or Mason might have decided to wait until morning to ride back. Olivia shook her head. He promised he'd be home tonight. He wouldn't stay in town unless something prevented him. Just as she was about to ask the sheriff to send his deputy to Medicine Bow to check on Mason, they heard hoofbeats, not one rider but several, approaching at speed. Olivia rushed to the porch, Samuel in her arms, her heart leaping with hope that quickly turned to fear as she made out 3 riders in the fading light, none of them Mason. The sheriff moved to stand beside her, hand on his holstered gun. "Stay back, Mrs. Vance." But as the riders drew closer, Olivia recognized the lead figure, Tom, his usually stoic face tight with worry. Behind him rode Caleb and a man she didn't know, wearing a doctor's bag across his saddle. "Tom," she called, stepping forward despite the sheriff's warning. "Where's Mason?" Tom dismounted quickly, his expression confirming her worst fears even before he spoke. "There was trouble in town, Mrs. Vance. Mason's been shot." The world seemed to tilt beneath Olivia's feet. Only Samuel's weight in her arms kept her grounded. He's alive," Tom said quickly. "But hurt bad. We've brought Doc Miller to help get him ready for the journey home." Olivia's relief was tempered by the gravity in Tom's voice. "What happened?" "Mason confronted Grayson in the bank," Tom explained, helping the doctor down from his horse. Words were exchanged, and then one of Grayson's men drew on Mason. He was faster, took down the gunman, but Grayson had a derringer, shot Mason in the back as he was leaving. "Where is he now?" Olivia demanded, already moving toward the barn where the wagon was kept. "At the hotel," Tom said. "Doc patched him up enough to travel, but he needs proper care. We're bringing him home tonight." "And Grayson?" the sheriff asked sharply. Tom's expression was grim satisfaction. "In jail. Half the town saw what happened. Even his money won't get him out of this one." The next few hours were a blur of preparation. Sarah took charge of Samuel while Olivia and the doctor transformed the bedroom into a sick room, gathering bandages, medicines, and clean linens. The hands readied the wagon with a mattress and blankets to transport Mason as comfortably as possible. When all was prepared, Tom and Caleb departed with the doctor to bring Mason home, leaving Olivia to the hardest task of all, waiting. It was well past midnight when they returned. Olivia, who had been pacing the porch despite Sarah's entreaties to rest, ran to the wagon as it pulled up before the house. Mason lay on the makeshift bed, his face ashen in the lantern light, but his eyes opened at the sound of her voice. "Liv," he whispered, reaching for her hand. "I'm sorry." "Hush," she soothed, her tears falling freely as she climbed into the wagon beside him. "You're home now. That's all that matters." Moving Mason into the house was a delicate operation, with Tom and Lewis carrying him while the doctor directed their movements to avoid aggravating the wound. Once settled in bed, the doctor examined him thoroughly before addressing Olivia. "The bullet missed his spine by less than an inch," Doc Miller explained, his manner professional but kind. "He's lost a lot of blood and there's risk of infection, but if we can prevent that, his chances are good." "Tell me what to do," Olivia said firmly, setting aside her fear. Mason needed her strength now, not her tears. The next days were a grueling cycle of wound care, medication, and anxious vigilance. Mason drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes clear-eyed and lucid, other times delirious with fever. Olivia barely left his side, sleeping in short snatches in a chair beside the bed, Samuel's cradle within arm's reach. On the third night, when the fever finally broke, Olivia wept with relief. Mason's eyes, when they opened, were clear for the first time since he'd been brought home. "Samuel," he asked, his voice weak but steady. Olivia lifted the sleeping baby from his cradle and brought him close enough for Mason to see. "He's fine, perfect, just waiting for his papa to get better." Mason managed a small smile. "And Grayson, in jail awaiting trial. The sheriff says with multiple witnesses to the shooting and evidence of the arson attempt, he'll likely hang." Olivia's voice hardened with an uncharacteristic edge. "I hope he does." "No," Mason said, surprising her. "That won't bring peace, Liv. Justice, yes, but not peace." Olivia considered this, then nodded slowly. "You're right. All I want is for him to never threaten our family again." "That much I think we can count on," Mason assured her. "From what Tom said, the whole town turned against him when they saw what happened. His power in medicine bow is broken, whether he hangs or not." Over the following weeks, Mason's recovery progressed steadily. By October, he was able to sit on the porch for short periods, watching as Olivia tended the kitchen garden with Samuel sleeping in a basket nearby. By November, he could walk the length of the house without assistance, though the doctor cautioned against riding or heavy work until spring. Word came from medicine, that Emmett Grayson had been convicted of attempted murder and sentenced to 20 years in the territorial prison. His bank had been taken over by his former assistant, a young man named Porter, who rode out to the Lazy V personally to assure Mason and Olivia that they would have no trouble securing loans for expansion when the railroad arrived. "A new chapter," Mason observed as they sat by the fire one December evening, Samuel sleeping in his father's arms while Olivia worked on a quilt. "For medicine bow and for us." Olivia smiled, setting aside her needle to join them on the sofa. "I was thinking about that, about new beginnings." Mason raised an eyebrow. "Oh, Samuel will be walking before we know it," she said, leaning against his shoulder. "He might like a brother or sister to play with someday." Mason's arm tightened around her. "Someday soon, I hope," Olivia laughed softly. "Let's get you fully recovered first." "But yes, I'd like that very much." Outside, snow began to fall, dusting the Lazy V in white. Inside, warmth and love filled every corner of the home Mason and Olivia had built together, a home that had begun with an act of compassion on an auction block in Medicine Bow. "Do you ever think about that day?" Olivia asked, following his gaze to the window where snowflakes danced in the lamplight. "When you bid for me," Mason considered the question, his hand absently stroking Samuel's back. "Sometimes, I think about how close I came to not riding into town that day. How differently things might have turned out. For both of us," Olivia agreed. "I was so frightened, so lost. I never imagined I could be this happy again." "When I said you'd never be sold again, I meant it," Mason said, turning to meet her eyes. "But I had no idea I was really buying my own future, my own happiness." "Not buying," Olivia corrected gently. "Saving. There's a difference." Mason smiled, leaning in to kiss her softly. "Best thing I ever did." As they sat together, their son sleeping peacefully between them, Olivia reflected on the journey that had brought them here, from despair to hope, from loneliness to love, from an auction block in Medicine Bow to this warm home filled with promise. The widow who had been auctioned with nothing left had found everything she could ever want in the arms of a cowboy who had bid high and kept his word. She would never be sold again, never be anything but cherished, for as long as they both lived. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the Lazy V ranch in a blanket of pristine white, while inside, the Vance family looked toward a future as bright and full of possibility as the Wyoming sky on a clear summer day. Spring of 1878 brought more than new calves and fresh grass to the Lazy V. The railroad construction had reached the edge of their expanded property, bringing with it opportunities that Mason, now fully recovered from his wound, was quick to capitalize on. He negotiated favorable rates for shipping cattle directly to eastern markets and secured contracts that would ensure the ranch's prosperity for years to come. Olivia, watching her husband confer with railroad officials on the porch one bright April morning, felt a surge of pride. Samuel, now 7 months old and determined to crawl everywhere, squirmed in her arms as she bounced him on her hip. "Your papa is a very smart man," she told the baby, who responded with a gummy smile that revealed his first 2 teeth. The railroad had brought other changes to their lives as well. Medicine Bow was growing rapidly, with new businesses opening and settlers arriving weekly. Mason had hired additional hands to manage the expanded herd, and Olivia found herself hosting dinner for neighbors and business associates more frequently. Through it all, their partnership remained the steady center of the Lazy V. Mason consulted Olivia on every major decision, valued her practical insight, and supported her when she decided to establish a small school on the ranch for the children of their workers and neighboring homesteaders. "You miss teaching," he observed one evening as she pored over books she'd ordered from Denver. "I can see it when you talk about the school plans." Olivia looked up, surprised. "I never told you I taught before I married George," Mason smiled. "You didn't have to." "I see how you light up when you explain something new to Samuel, even though he's too young to understand. You have a teacher's heart." His perception touched her deeply. George had never bothered to notice such things about her, had never really seen her at all beyond her usefulness as a wife who enhanced his social standing. "I do miss it," she admitted. "But this will be different, better even. Just 6 or 7 children to start, 3 days a week." "Use whatever you need from the ranch," Mason offered immediately. "That old storage building by the creek would make a fine schoolhouse with some work." By summer, Olivia's school was operational, with 4 children from the ranch and 3 from neighboring homesteads attending regularly. She found immense satisfaction in teaching again, in watching young minds blossom under her guidance. On Samuel's first birthday in September 1878, they hosted a small celebration. The ranch hands and their families gathered in the yard, which Olivia and Sarah had decorated with streamers and flowers. There was cake, music, and laughter as Samuel, now walking with wobbly determination, charmed everyone with his antics. As evening fell and the guests departed, Mason found Olivia sitting on the porch swing, watching the sunset with Samuel sleeping against her shoulder. "Happy?" he asked, joining her. "Completely," she replied, leaning into him as his arm circled her. "I was just thinking about how different things were a year ago, you recovering from your wound, Grayson awaiting trial, all of us learning to be a family. And now look at us," Mason said with satisfaction. "The ranch is thriving, our son is growing like a weed, and you've got your school. Pretty good year, all told." Olivia hesitated, then decided the moment was perfect. It might get even better next year. Mason glanced at her, eyebrows raised in question. "I think Samuel might get that brother or sister we talked about sooner than expected," she said softly. "Around March, Doctor Miller says." The joy that illuminated Mason's face was everything Olivia had hoped for. He gathered her and Samuel gently into his arms, mindful of the sleeping child between them. "You've made me the happiest man in Wyoming territory," he whispered against her hair. Again. Their second child, a daughter they named Elizabeth Sarah Vance, arrived on a blustery March day in 1879. She had Olivia's honey-brown hair and Mason's determined chin. And from the moment Samuel laid eyes on his baby sister, he appointed himself her devoted protector. "Mine," the toddler declared, patting Elizabeth's blanket-wrapped form with careful hands. "Yes, yours," Olivia agreed, exchanging amused glances with Mason. "Your sister." As Elizabeth grew from infant to toddler and Samuel from toddler to little boy, the rhythm of life at the Lazy V expanded to encompass their needs and personalities. Mason built a proper nursery adjacent to the master bedroom and began planning a treehouse for when the children were older. Olivia's school flourished, growing to 12 students by 1880, necessitating the construction of a larger building with proper desks and a small library. She taught 3 days a week, with Sarah helping care for Elizabeth on those days. The railroad's arrival had indeed transformed the region, just as Grayson had predicted. Medicine Bow evolved from a small cattle town into a bustling hub of commerce, with new families arriving monthly. Mason's foresight in securing shipping contracts early gave the Lazy V an advantage over newer operations, and their reputation for quality beef spread to markets as far east as Chicago. In the summer of 1881, nearly 5 years after Olivia had stood on that auction block in Medicine Bow, she and Mason took the children on their first real family trip to Denver, where Mason had business with cattle buyers. The city's grandeur impressed Samuel, now nearly 4, but 3-year-old Elizabeth was more interested in the toy store window displays than the tall buildings. "She has your practical nature," Mason observed as they watched their daughter carefully examining a porcelain doll before deciding it wasn't worth her interest compared to a small wooden horse. "And your decisiveness," Olivia countered with a laugh. Their hotel suite was luxurious by Wyoming standards, with separate bedrooms for the adults and children, indoor plumbing and electric lights. After the children were asleep, Olivia and Mason enjoyed a rare evening alone, dining at the hotel's elegant restaurant. "You ever miss this?" Mason asked as they lingered over dessert. "City life, fine dining, theaters?" Olivia considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I miss certain aspects, bookshops especially, but city life itself, no." She reached across the table to take his hand. "Everything I want is at the Lazy V." Mason's smile was tender as he lifted her hand to his lips. "Even after all this time, I still wonder how I got so lucky." "It wasn't luck," Olivia said softly. "It was courage, yours that day at the auction, and mine when I decided to trust you." Later that night, in the privacy of their room, their lovemaking held a special sweetness, a celebration of the journey they had taken together, and the life they had built from such unlikely beginnings. The years continued to bring changes and blessings. In 1882, Olivia discovered she was expecting their third child, and in November, James Mason Vance joined the family, a robust boy with a shock of dark hair and his father's whiskey-colored eyes. With 3 children under 6, Olivia temporarily stepped back from teaching, turning the school over to a qualified young woman from back east, whom Mason hired to live on the ranch. The Lazy V itself continued to prosper, expanding to include a small dairy operation overseen by Sarah, whose daughters had grown into capable young women. News reached them in 1883 that Emmett Grayson had died in prison, not by violence as might have been expected, but from consumption that had spread through the prison population that winter. "How do you feel about that?" Olivia asked Mason when he shared the news. He considered the question, bouncing young James on his knee while Samuel and Elizabeth built a block tower nearby. Sad in a way. He could have done so much good with his resources, his influence. Instead, he chose power and greed. Olivia nodded, understanding. Mason had never sought vengeance, only justice and the safety of his family. That generosity of spirit was one of the many reasons she loved him. By 1885, the Lazy V had become one of the most respected ranches in Wyoming Territory. Mason's innovative breeding programs and sustainable grazing practices were often cited as examples for newer operations to follow. Olivia had returned to teaching part-time, while also managing the household and raising 3 lively children who filled the ranch house with laughter, squabbles, and endless energy. That summer, as they celebrated their 8th wedding anniversary with a picnic by the creek where Mason had first brought Olivia to see the ranch, he surprised her with a gift, the deed to the Lazy V, amended to include her name alongside his. "It was always ours together," he explained as she examined the document with tears in her eyes. "This just makes it official." Olivia, deeply moved by the gesture, presented him with her own surprise, a family portrait she had commissioned during their latest trip to Denver. The artist had captured them perfectly. Mason standing tall and strong, Olivia seated before him with James on her lap, Samuel and Elizabeth on either side, all of them radiating the happiness and security of a family bonded by love rather than obligation. "It's perfect," Mason said, studying the portrait with obvious emotion. "All of it, you, the children, our life here. Sometimes I can hardly believe it's real." Olivia leaned against him, watching their children play at the creek's edge under Tom's watchful eye. "It's real," she assured him. "And it all began because you couldn't stand by and watch an injustice." Mason kissed the top of her head. "Best impulse I ever acted on." As they sat together, the warm Wyoming sun bathing the land they both loved, Olivia reflected on how completely her life had transformed from that desperate day in Medicine Bow. The widow who had been auctioned with nothing left had found not only security but profound happiness with the cowboy who had bid high and promised she would never be sold again. Mason had kept that promise, and so many more over the years. Together they had built not just a prosperous ranch but a true home filled with love, respect, and the laughter of children, a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. "I love you, Mason Vance," Olivia said, turning to meet his gaze. "Today and always." His smile, still capable of making her heart skip after all these years, was tender as he drew her closer. "And I love you, Olivia Vance, for saving me as surely as I saved you." In the distance, Samuel's voice called for his parents to come see the fish he'd spotted, and James's delighted squeal joined his brother's excitement. Elizabeth, ever the practical one, was already removing her shoes to wade in the shallow water. Hand in hand, Mason and Olivia rose to join their children. Stepping forward together into the future, they had created a future built on a foundation of one man's compassion and one woman's courage on a long-ago day in Medicine Bow, Wyoming.